Hi friends, welcome to Anti-Static. Today I'm going to be showing you how to create this digital noise complex. What I like about this technique is that you can create something that looks really complicated, but it's actually fairly simple if you just break it down step by step. That's what I'm going to do here today. Using some very basic techniques all built into After Effects, we can create something pretty interesting. Alright, so let's get started. I'm going to just go ahead and create a new comp. And we're going to make this 2000 by 2000. When working on a project like this, you always want to make sure to work a little bit larger than what you think you're going to need, just so you have it. And it's also a great idea to work in really even round numbers, because when we're working with effects like mosaic and the grid, trying to conform things to a grid makes it so much easier when you have round numbers you're working with. I'm going to call this pattern 1, and about 10 seconds is great. I'll hit OK. Now, what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be working, one of our primary effects we're going to be using is called CC Kaleida. And as the name suggests, that it was going to emulate what a kaleidoscope sees. And if you look through a kaleidoscope, what you're seeing really is just a bunch of chaos. There's just a bunch of beads and sequins and little bits of paper, whatever it is. But that chaos, because it's filtered through mirrors and bouncing around, is created a pattern that gives it some structure, makes it much more interesting to look at. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing here. We're just going to be creating a bunch of chaos, but then applying a structure and a grid to that so that we have a really good balance between contrast and harmony. Okay, there's chaos, but there's also structure. And that's what's going to make this more successful. So a couple of things to keep in mind when you're working with the Kaleida effect. I'm just going to go ahead and create a new adjustment layer, and we're just going to call it Kaleida. There are a couple of quirks that you need to be aware of, because it can be really frustrating if you don't understand how this works. And that's why today what I'm going to be teaching you is what I call the quarter method. All right, in order to illustrate this, I'm just going to go ahead and create right now a new comp. And we're going to make this comp 1/4 the size of our pattern comp. All right, or in other words, half in each dimension. So we'll make this 1000 by 1000. And we're going to call this Kaleida quarter. All right, and then what we'll do is we're just going to go ahead and create a new solid and call it noise. Call it noise template, because we're going to be using this as a template to create all of our noise layers. So we'll just go ahead and add another effect called fractal noise. And fractal noise, of course, just creates a very noisy pattern. That can be really helpful for us. What we're going to do, though, is make sure we change the noise type to block. And that's going to give us a much more structured, much less organic feel. It's still organic. It's still got a lot of chaos there. But you've got these hard edges. So we'll turn up the contrast quite a bit. Maybe just make that 300. And I might go ahead and turn the complexity down to maybe 3. And we're going to set an expression on the evolution here. So just Option or Alt click on the stopwatch and type in a quick expression, time times 40. And that's just going to give us a nice, evenly repeating pattern that just evolves and animates through as it goes on. All right, and then we will change the blend mode of this layer to screen. All right, and that's going to be our basic setup. We're just going to duplicate that layer and use it multiple times, making little adjustments to build out our assets. So let's go back into our pattern 1. And I'm going to show you what we're going to do is go into a project and just drop this quarter comp right in there. And make sure that the position is set to 500 by 500. You just want to have it right in the top left corner. All right, now if we drop this below our Kaleida adjustment map, you'll see that it's going to do nothing. Why is that? Oh, because we forgot to put Kaleida on here. All right, so let's add the Kaleida effect on our adjustment layer. And right away you see that it starts to create a repeating pattern. The way Kaleida works, it's going to break whatever's below this adjustment layer into tiles and then move, rotate, flip, and flop those tiles to create this pattern. Now, this might be not quite what we expect, and it's not what we want. And this is one of the quirks that I want to show you about Kaleida, is that it's only going to repeat what it sees below the Kaleida layer. So we need to create a new solid. We'll just call this BG. It's just a solid black, and we're going to put it in the background. And you'll see instantly it's going to change. So if we just toggle this on and off, you'll see what's happening is only where there's information below the Kaleida adjustment layer is it going to be repeating that information. It's going to be including it in the pattern. So we have to have something back there. We can turn the opacity of this layer down to 0.1, so it's effectively invisible. Right? If we just solo that, turn on our transparency, we can see it's effectively invisible. But as long as there's something there, the Kaleida is going to include it in its pattern. All right, let's go back to our Kaleida. We're just going to change the size here to 100. What this represents is a percentage of the overall comp size. We want 100% of the comp to be included in our Kaleida. All right, one other weird thing to keep in mind is that when you're using this Kaleida adjustment layer, everything has to stay within the bounds of the comp, because the moment that something goes outside of it, it starts to move the center point in really weird ways. It just kind of screws everything up, which is weird. So that's why this quarter method is really helpful. And now we can start building out our quarter comp. So I'm just going to reset this contrast to 200. Make this brightness maybe 100. That's just going to be our template. We'll just turn that off, but I'm going to duplicate this layer to start building out some of our noise. So we'll turn this one on. And this one I'm going to set the contrast to 500. And then we're going to take the brightness down. I want to get it down pretty low because I just want a few of these little bits showing up. All right? Keep it subtle. And then the great thing about fractal noise effect is that you can duplicate it and use the same pattern that's created by the fractal noise to create other effects that will complement the layers below it. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to change the name of this to BG Noise 1. And then if I just duplicate this comp, now I'm going to add another effect on top of this top copy. And it's going to be find edges. And that's just going to outline all of the blocks. It's going to find all those edges and highlight them. If I turn on this invert button right here, it's going to invert the colors, which means we're going to see the layers below it because it's set to screen. So now what you see is we have these two different copies of BG noise, these two different examples of fractal noise that are working together. All right, so maybe I'll take this second copy and I'm going to add one more effect on here, Venetian blinds. And we'll just set the transition to 50 and maybe the direction to 45, and we'll turn the width down quite a bit. There we go. And we should have these two pieces working together. Let's turn up the scale a little bit here, I think. Transform, make this scale 200. And we're going to do that on this one as well. Good. We'll just have some kind of bigger basic blocks starting us out. Okay, good. Now let's take our noise template and we're going to duplicate that one more time. Bring it to the top of our stack and turn that on. Let's go ahead and just solo that so we can focus on this for a moment. I'm going to call this one line noise 1. And here we're just going to maybe increase this contrast a little bit. I'm going to make these a little bit brighter, but I'm going to change the transform. This time we're going to uncheck uniform scaling and make something a little bit wider. Let's just span this out some, maybe to about 400. Take the height down, and then we'll want to dial out this brightness down, just so that, again, we just want to have a little bit, just a few of these little pieces showing up. Maybe something like that. Yeah, I might turn the complexity up on this one. Maybe 5, 4.5, something like that. And I want to make let me just zoom into one of these. I'll make this a little more complex by adjusting the sub settings. So let's decrease the sub scaling a little bit. Something like that. Maybe we'll turn down the influence quite a bit. And we just have some more complex noise. All right, and then again, let's add a find edges. Now another effect I like to use when I'm working with find edges is called Minimax. And Minimax kind of works like a simple choker. The way that a choker works on an alpha channel, Minimax works on intensity values. And so if I just turn this radius up just a little bit, maybe 3, and what you see what happens is that the image gets blown out because it's set to maximum right now. So what that means is that all the white areas of the image are going to get expanded by about 3 pixels. All right, so if we set this to minimum, it's going to do the opposite. Now all the dark areas are going to get expanded. And if I just scrub through this, you'll see what's happening. It'll just blow out those block edges a little bit, but in a uniform way. Right, so let's set this back down to 3 and make sure we turn off or turn on don't shrink edges. And then what we can do is we can add another find edges effect. Again, if I just scale this up, you see what's happening. And sometimes it's nice when you're working with find edges just to duplicate this maybe a couple times. If I do it again, you just see some more detail gets added in here. Maybe one more time. Look at that. A lot of detail that just gets added right in there. As we scrub through this, we can see all these little bits and bobs moving around. Nice. Okay. Now, oh yeah, so we always want to also, this bottom copy, just make sure we turn on invert. So it goes back to our black, and we can turn off solo. See all these layers working together. Now, one thing about find edges, what it tends to happen is it kind of blows out the contrast and tends to turn all these edges to really bright white. I want to add a little bit of contrast back into this. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to duplicate this line noise 1, and we're going to make a matte out of this second copy. So I'm just going to delete all of these effects except for the fractal noise. Let's just solo that for a minute. And we're just going to play around with a few of these settings. First, let's turn the complexity down to 2. We want it to be much more simple. Turn down the contrast, and maybe then we're going to turn up the brightness. Something like that. And then if we set that as a Luma matte, or first layer, just change this to Luma, then you can see we're getting some of these little more variety in the opacity of these different parts. All right, that's going to help us as we colorize this thing. Okay, great. Now let's duplicate another copy of noise template down here. Put it at the top, turn it on. We'll call this one dot noise 1. And we're going to solo that. And let's turn up the contrast some, maybe 300. And let's add back in, so get kind of a bigger pattern here. Maybe just set the brightness to 0 and turn up the complexity. Let's get a lot of things going on in this one, and we'll maybe just bump up the scale too. Just make these kind of big blocks, and then we're going to add an effect on here called CC Starburst, and Starburst is just going to blow everything up. But if you just take the scatter down to 0, you see it just kind of creates this dot grid. So take that down to 0 and take the speed to 0 as well. And now everything below that effect is just turned into a grid of dots. And we can play around with this grid spacing and the grid size. And if we just take the size of these dots down to maybe around there, and then maybe take this grid spacing down a little bit. And then what I want to do here is I only want to have part of this comp have this image on it. So let's turn on our grid. Always good to work on with a grid, an After Effects grid, when you're doing anything that has sort of digital noise. And I just want to mask out maybe a section of it. Just conform it to our grid. So it's just something like that. Let's turn off the solo and just go back into our pattern and just check out what this is looking like. All right, so right away you see having this Kaleida layer just adds such a level of structure to this thing that we're creating. Again, you can just go through here and just start to look through some of these things. Start playing around with some of these and just see the different effects you get. If you just scrub through, you can see because we have those evolutions set, all this stuff is just going to be evolving and continually changing into different interesting patterns. I'm just going to step back to unfold right now. We're going to our Kaleida, and I want to make this, let's just turn the opacity of this down quite a bit. So it's just something kind of subtle. Turn off the grid. I just want a little bit of that on there. All right, good. Now let's just duplicate that layer. And we're just going to make another copy of these dots. But this time, let's just make them a little bit bigger. If we set this scale to 50, maybe turn up the grid size a little bit. And then we'll just play around with the contrast and the brightness. Let's turn this way up. And then we'll turn this way down. So we going to get this second layer. And then let's add a find edges effect to this one as well. And we'll go ahead and invert that. And put that before the starburst. So then we'll just have a few lines of this grid that are being changed into this dot pattern. Maybe we'll bump up this. Yeah, make these kind of bigger ones. Grid spacing to 8. Again, I love this technique because then we got two different copies of the same fractal noise. They're affecting the same area, but we can just get two very different looks that work together, work in sympathy. Okay, looking good. All right, let's do one more copy here. And we'll just duplicate our noise template one more time. And bring it up here and call this bits 1. Because here what we're going to do is we're going to really crunch down and get some just bright, small, little bits kind of flashing around the screen. So take the contrast up. And then we'll take the brightness way down. Again, just something on there. Make sure that's set to 100. Let's see, maybe we'll set the scale down to 50. So just have a few small little bits coming on. And then let's just try adding some find edges to this. And I'm just going to duplicate this a couple times and just kind of see what that looks like. And sometimes I just like to experiment, just add a minimax in here. Set it to 3 minimum and just put it in between a couple of these find edges. And you can just play around with these settings. Maybe you duplicate this again and put it in between this copy. Just kind of see what each of these does when you and play around with the complexity as well. You'll get some of these other little squares appearing. Pretty good. We'll just turn down this brightness again. I want to take out some of these things. So it's just a few. All right, now let's duplicate this once again. And let's take off these effects, except for our fractal noise. Turn this back down. Turn this back up. And maybe set the scale up larger. Let's go to another big one here. And let's turn the complexity up to 6. Let's do another find edges. Maybe another starburst. And turn down this scale. We're going to have to turn this brightness up in this case. Make sure we invert this. what I want to do is create a specific area, a few areas here we just mask off. So we just have a kind of a, turn on my grid here. So we just have kind of another little outcropping of data. You know, maybe we just kind of do like this, and then maybe there's another one that comes out like that. So we just kind of have this shape, right? When we put it in our Kaleida, run it through that filter, it's going to make this more complex shape. Maybe we'll try just turning up mosaic on this and set this up to something high like 100 by 100. Turn on sharp colors. Let's see what that looks like. Maybe let's add another Venetian blinds to this. Just turn that up a little bit. Maybe we'll set this to 45 and set this width down. Maybe set it to minus 45 so it's kind of angled inwards. And set this really low, these lines. Yeah. Just something kind of complex, but in the end pretty simple. So let's turn off that solo and just take a look at what we have. Okay, looking pretty good. So you can just tweak this to your heart's content. Just play around with all these different settings. You can move these things around. You can mask things. You can add different effects. As long as you're working within this quarter comp, whatever you put here is going to be put into this grid. Let's move on and talk about coloring. There's a lot of ways that you could add color to a comp like this. What I like to do in this situation is just add an effect called Colorama. So we're going to add a new adjustment layer and call it color. And here we're going to add the Colorama effect. Now just hold on to your hat if you're not used to this, because it goes nuts immediately. And there's just so many controls in here, and it just feels overwhelming that I avoided this effect for a really long time, but it's really powerful. And what it does is it's going to take basically one color system and transform it into another color system. So for example here, we have the input phase set to intensity. What that means is it's going to read anything below it, the brightness of anything below it, and transform that brightness into this color scale right here. So when we turn it on, the black turns to this bright intense red. We want to get rid of that right away. So I'm just going to go ahead and just take this red and scale the opacity all the way down to 0. And there's still a little bit of a red fringe. So I'm just going to, if I just double click on that, I can turn this to black. And that's feeling much better right away. Now there's a lot of presets in here you could use. You could just grab one of these and colorize this however you want. As long as you just take that kind of top color right there, paint it back to black, you're going to get something interesting. I'm just going to go ahead and stick with this hue cycle. Make sure this is black. Set the opacity to 0, I think. And then I'm going to kind of go with a blue hue. So we're just going to color. I'm just going to click on that, double click on the yellow, and just start adding some blues back in here. All right, we'll just crunch this up here. Just click in between any of these triangles to create another one. Let's create some darker ones, some lighter ones, some that are more green, some that are more blue. Just add some blues back in here, kind of like that. Maybe have kind of a paler one. And then in between these blues, just create these small channels of highlight colors. So maybe like right here, I'll click right in here and add a pink. And then every once in a while, you'll see that pink color kind of show up in some of these areas, right? You see that green just starting to creep in. Here's some of that pink. And the more you play around with this stuff, if I widen this out, you're going to see more pink. Maybe I'll click in here and create kind of a yellowish, orangish thing, contrasting color. And there you see it popping up down here. This is a lot of just dialing it in. Just playing around till you find something that feels right. Maybe we'll make this one a little more purple. Like a deeper. Let's Put another blue over here, maybe kind of aqua tealish. Make sure that opacity is set all the way up. Okay. And then sometimes I like to turn up this blend with original just a little bit, just to desaturate that some. And then we can add a glow. I'm just going to add a basic glow here. We can tweak these settings as well. Maybe add a few different copies. Right now, I'm just going to leave it as is. I'm just going to pull up the radius a little bit. Okay, so that is looking pretty cool. Again, just got to scrub through this and kind of see all the things that it's doing. Now, one other thing we can do, we can go back into our Kaleida quarter. We've got all this procedural stuff going on. Maybe you want some more traditional animation as well. Something that's a little easier to keyframe. Maybe you want to highlight some specific things for some reason. We can do that. So I'm just going to create a rectangle by double-clicking on our shape, rectangle shape. And let's turn this way down to like 15, just so this really small rectangle. Make sure it's set to white. I'll turn off the stroke for now. And then what we could do is, let's take this rectangle, we'll call this box 1. And maybe I'll have it kind of start in this little box right here that comes up on the screen, and I'll just start it there. So when that thing grows in, a box will appear. And let's keyframe the position. And if we just move ahead maybe 20 frames and shoot this straight up, and then maybe have it hold there 10 frames, then go another 20 and shoot it across this way, about the same amount. Maybe I'll have it hold again, and then maybe it goes kind of diagonally off the screen. Again, we can move things off the screen within this quarter comp, just not within our pattern that has the Kaleida applied to it. I'll just cut that off there. I'm just going to put some basic easing on here, just some ease out. Okay, and let's add another shape layer. I'm just going to grab my pen tool, and let's make sure that our snap to grid is turned on. And I'm just going to draw a line, maybe down here, start at this corner, go over here, straight up, and maybe this will go just straight out. I want to keep it pretty simple. And this one we're going to turn off the fill color and just turn up the stroke width a little bit. Alright, now we can add structure to this thing any way we want. If we want to draw in some permanent lines that maybe we can put some fields within, fields of noise, we can do that. But in this case I want to keep this animated. I'm going to call this stroke 1, and I'm just going to twirl down and go into the contents here and add a trim paths effector. And then if I open this up, I can just go back to the beginning, set a keyframe for the end of the trim paths, set it to 0, and go forward a little bit, a few seconds, and set that to 100. Again, I'll just grab those keyframes, just add a little bit of easing, maybe we'll ease in out. And then if I copy these keyframes, I can move forward just a little bit from where it starts, click on the start, and just paste them. And then that way it's just going to create this little snake that moves along. And the closer these two sets of keyframes are, the shorter that snake will be. Right, so if I want to make it really short, or if I want to make it long, I can expand those out. Okay. I'll just keep it pretty short for now. Okay, so let's go ahead and just unsolo that, close these things up. Let's take a look at our comp. We'll just do a quick RAM preview here. Now, another thing we can do to add a little more interest is we can actually create a couple different versions of this Kaleida. So let's just grab this Kaleida effect layer, adjustment layer, And we're just going to create a mask right in the middle. Again, conform this to our grid. Maybe something like that. Actually, I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. And then if we duplicate that Kaleida, so we have 2 copies of it now, we'll take this bottom copy and change the mask mode to subtract. And then we can alter the way that each of these is affecting the image. Right, so we have 2 different versions of Kaleida. This one's affecting the outside, this one's affecting the inside. So maybe this inside one I'll change to flower. And it's going to react differently than the outside. You can change this to something else. You just play around with these things and see what works. And then one final thing that I like to do is, we've done a great job of setting up this very symmetrical comp. It's very structured, and yet it's very organic. And what I like to do is add just a little bit of chaos back into this, into the structure, so that it's not perfect. It's just a touch glitchy. And what we can do is just create a new solid, and we'll call this time map. And we're going to be adding a time displacement effect. So first we create a time map, adding a solid, then we'll put a fractal noise on here, or in fact we can use a turbulent noise in this case. Turbulent noise just renders a little bit faster, but especially in this block, when we have the complexity set pretty low, it doesn't look so good. It just tends to get these gradients. It doesn't work as well as a fractal noise. But in this case, I'm just going to be adding a mosaic effect after it, so it doesn't really matter. Let's go ahead and just set an expression on the evolution. Maybe time times 90, something a little faster. And maybe we'll bump up the contrast just a little bit. Okay, now we're going to hide that, and we're going to create one more adjustment layer. And this time we're going to call it time displacement. And we're going to add the time displacement effect. Now, I'm going to warn you right away, time displacement is a very expensive effect. I mean, computationally expensive. So it's going to slow your rendering down quite a bit. That's why I wait till the last minute to do this. And I'm going to just turn down the max displacement in seconds to just 0.3. We can probably take down this time resolution as well. And then make sure you set your time displacement layer to the map that we just created, the time map. And change the source to effects and masks. All right, now what that's going to do, it's going to look at this time map, and it's going to alter the time of each one of these tiles based on the intensity of that color. So the white ones are going to move ahead by 0.3 seconds. The black ones are going to move behind by 0.3 seconds, or vice versa. I can't remember actually which. And anything in between is going to be offset just that amount. So this does a great job of just adding a little bit of chaos back into our perfect scene. You can show this by just, let me turn this on and off. You can see like these lines, for example. This one's kind of being cut off. It's not being cut off, it's just that it hasn't gotten there yet. Right? It's going to get there, it's just the time displacement effect is making this side be a little bit slower in this area than this side. So it just adds a little bit of interest. Now, what we're going to do is create one more comp, our final here. I'm going to call this final and set the size to 1920 by 1080. And we can drag our pattern 1 into that final comp. Now, what's really great about this technique is that it's really easy to modify and make other patterns based on what we already have. So I'm going to take this pattern 1 and duplicate it to pattern 2. We'll open it up. The first thing we can do is go into our color layer here. We could open up our Colorama output cycle and change all of these colors if we wanted to. I'm just going to keep it exactly how it was. But I'm just going to add one more effect, which is hue and saturation. And then we can just adjust this hue slider to colorize this a little bit differently. Because what we really want is we want colors that feel like kind of they're in the same family. I don't want something wildly different. I want something that's just a little bit off. So I'll just shift that, just a few degrees. And then we could absolutely go into our project. We could duplicate our Kaleida quarter, make a whole new comp, or just move things around and replace that Kaleida quarter in our pattern 2 to a different one. But we could also just take this Kaleida quarter and very simply just rotate it, maybe 90 degrees. And then you're going to get a very different pattern. Right? All based on the same information that we've already created. I can just change this to 180 maybe. I can go into each of these Kaleida layers, and maybe I'll change the mirroring that they're using. Just to make something different and unique. All right, that's all it takes. So let's go in and we'll make another one. We're going to duplicate pattern 2, open that up, go to our color map, and adjust this hue. Maybe we'll go the other direction now. Slightly more green. That's looking cool. And we'll just change this maybe minus 90. And just find something different for these Kaleida layers. Maybe we're trying to flower here. So it has kind of this four-way symmetry. Now one more thing I'll show you that's I think pretty cool in a situation like this. I'll create one more adjustment layer on here. And here I'm going to add an effect called CC Gridler. And Gridler works kind of the same way as Kaleida in that it's going to cut up your image into tiles and then affect those tiles. But here, instead of moving them, it's not going to move the tiles at all. It's just going to scale or rotate them in place. So you can see what this looks like. I'm going to turn up the tile size again. This is a percentage of the whole. I'm just going to turn this tile size up to maybe 30. And then if I just rotate this, watch what happens. You can see that the image is being cut up into different tiles, and each tile is being rotated. So let's fit this to 90 degrees. And we can change the tile map size. And then we can change the scale of each of those tiles. Now if you scale it down, it's going to start to lose some information in between. You can just turn off this cut tiles, and it will bring that stuff right back in. So let's go ahead and reset this. I'll change the tile size back to, I don't know, maybe 40. And maybe just flip each of the tiles upside down, like so. And then we play with the scale and just kind of see what that does. Probably want to make these the same though. Just gives, again, a completely different look. So we'll go into our final here, and we'll just bring those other two patterns that we just created right on top of our first one, our hero pattern. We're going to grab each of these and change the transfer mode to screen. And maybe turn on the 3D switch here. I'm going to offset these other two just a little bit. Maybe set this one to minus 10 in the Z. And maybe this one is minus 100. Oh, not that much. Maybe this is a little more. And then we can just figure out a camera move here. Let's add a new camera. And I like to do something pretty wide so we can get kind of macro shots of this. I don't know what this wants to look like, but you know, maybe we just zoom in right to the center here. I think I might try to do kind of a rotation. Let's move this up. Keep that center right in the center. And then what if we just create a null? Nope, not an adjustment, a null. Right in the center of our comp. We're going to make that 3D also. And then we can parent our camera to that null. So this way we can play around with the rotation, the X, the Y, the Z rotation, and just rotate around that point. That might be nice as we're, so maybe I'll end on the straight ahead. Let's go to about 5 seconds and spin this around some. moving to the end. Let's set a position on the, sorry, go back to the beginning, set a keyframe on the position and the anchor point of our camera. Go to the end here, and we're just going to zoom in right to that center point. Let's do a half RAM preview, just kind of see what that's going to look like. You know, whatever. I might take this, some of these other patterns and scale them up a little bit. They're not our hero, they don't need to be super sharp, and we want to kind of just fill in that space that's behind them. And you might take down the opacity even on some of these. If we go into our camera and open up the options by clicking AA, and then we'll turn up our aperture way up so it'll be kind of, get some depth of field on this. And then we're going to have to find our focus distance. So if we go into our camera view here and change it to top, then we can kind of see what's happening from a different angle on this camera. It's sliding in and moving away. Let's find our focus distance and just make sure this is kind of, you want to kind of put this box so that the middle of the box is right in the middle of the comp. This angle is going to be difficult to really see what we're looking at, but we're just going to eyeball it for now. So I'll just hit a keyframe on that focus distance, go to the end. Maybe this time we'll change it to the left view. That's much easier. Now again, if we just move this focus distance back so that that plane should be hitting right, our hero plane is this one in the back here. Right, so just getting right in there. Let's go to our active camera and we can see how well we did. Yep, that's looking good. Okay, so this is looking pretty cool. What I've done here is I kind of created a quick hero graphic just to go right in the middle, give us something to look at. So hopefully this tutorial has taught you some good techniques for creating digital noise using CC Kaleida and the idiosyncrasies that it has, getting used to those things and being okay with them. And then just some quick techniques on how to create these noise patterns, repeating noise patterns, using fractal noise to create complementary layers that can work together and create some really detailed digital artifacts. Well, that's it. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.